What is good, wrestling fans? You have reached the Two Bros Wrestling Show, and do not adjust your picture. You are seeing only one bro. Doug could not make it this evening. We are going to soldier on without him. He's taking care of some things he needs to take care of. I'm going to use you as my partner tonight because tonight we are talking about Survivor Series, War Games in particular. Next weekend, we're going to give you a preview of all the matches that are currently scheduled, how we got to those matches, and who I think is going to win. So, again, you are my partner, so you're going to have to tell me who you think is going to win. But before we get into any of that, we're going to hit that opening bell with a little bit of news. Let's start off. For those of you who were expecting Ric Flair on Dynamite for Blood and Guts, we have an apology from the Nature Boy. Though he had been announced in advance that he was going to be appearing on the special edition, Blood and Guts edition, that was happening right there in Greensboro, obviously a historic city, very synonymous with Ric Flair. It was supposed to have been him and his old friend / rival, Ricky Steamboat, but if you watched, you saw that only Steamboat appeared on the broadcast. Flair was in Greensboro, as it turns out. He was also at the arena, but left before the segment he was scheduled to be a part of. Flair explained on social media he was nursing a rotator cuff injury, and that caused him to have to leave the show early. So get well, Ric Flair, but, I don't think they were going to have you throwing chops in the ring. So I don't know. I thought it was a little bit odd that he knew he had a rotator cuff injury, committed, showed up, but apparently bothering him bad enough, even though he wasn't going to get physical, that he had to leave. But, hey, he's the Nature Boy, so nature's going to nature, I suppose. Moving on to our next story, we have yet another update on the continual evolution of the Andrade El Idolo contract situation. Last week, we reported that he walked out of an appearance in Mexico after showing up for the pre-show autograph signing, but leaving before he was to be in the ring. We may have an answer now as to why that would be, and despite it first being reported that WWE was attempting to enforce a one-year non-compete on Andrade due to breach of contract, that would only be applying to the United States, that might not actually be the case. Sources, including the Wrestling Observer, are now suggesting that Andrade has a worldwide non-compete clause. Because this may be challenged in court, I imagine that Andrade is maybe a little nervous about testing just what he can and cannot maybe get away with. Obviously, there has to be something to that with the non-compete. If it was only for the United States, you'd think that Andrade would be taking bookings in New Japan or CMLL at this point in time, but he hasn't. So he might be erring on the side of caution to see if he can, again, when there's legal wranglings, to see if he can get out of this non-compete and go to AEW like he obviously intended to do. I was including this next story just to see Doug get mad, but of course Doug was not able to join us. And you'll know why here in a second. But AEW is returning to the Esports Stadium in Arlington, Texas for a month-long AEW Collision residency beginning in January. So get your tickets now and then later and then again. In other words, if you live in the area, you're going to have a lot of chances to see AEW in January. Doug would have got mad about this one because he did not care for the way the residency turned out the last time, did not like the look and feel of it, or the way that after a while the crowds start to believe that they are part of the show because they're there every single week. So it does end up with a fairly interesting dynamic, but hey, if you're a big wrestling fan and you're a big AEW fan, you got a lot of chances to see the product. That can't be all bad. And it does save money for the company, which is really what this residency is all about. Moving on. WWE is not happy with Gigi Dolan, known outside of WWE as Priscilla Kelly. She was released earlier this year from NXT. She gave an interview where she said that some NXT wrestlers make as little as $30,000 a year, and stated that she is now making more outside of WWE than she was when she was in NXT. That statement obviously did not sit well with some at TKO, and one of the reasons maybe is that it was a little inaccurate. So Brian Alvarez of the Wrestling Observer was one of those who refuted the claims, stating that NXT deals start at $75,000, with the stars of the brand making significantly more than that. So, in other words, no one in NXT proper is making $30,000 a year. He did state, though, that WWE ID talent are working for opportunities, and then maybe Kelly was sort of rolling those talents and performance center young kids into the whole NXT ecosystem, because some of those folks don't even make anywhere near the $30,000, which is probably why we've seen recent stars like recent ID stars like Zeta Steel go back to doing indies only, probably making way more there, certainly, than she was as an ID talent. Speaking of the ID program, ID needed a new women's title holder after the inaugural champ Kylie Ray announced her pregnancy and then wasn't signed to a new deal when her initial one expired. So that made the title vacant, and that is no longer the case because a champ was crowned this past week at a Beyond Wrestling show in Rhode Island. Congratulations to Lainey Luck, who won a 6-person elimination bout to win the Women's ID Championship. With the win, the 33-year-old from Kansas City gets an ID contract, so under $30,000 a year, but still the opportunity. Major League Wrestling has moved its headquarters. Court Bauer's promotion is leaving New York City and setting up shop in South Carolina, Charleston specifically. The move makes sense for several reasons. For one, the South and the Carolinas in particular are strong in their wrestling history. That is Flair country. That is the old Mid-Atlantic. The wrestling culture in the South, in that area in particular, is very strong. So I'm sure they will receive MLW with open arms. But really more practical, the reason probably is for the move is that one of MLW's biggest partners, the actor Danny McBride, is from Charleston. So McBride is the owner and producer of Don Gato Tequila, which has become the primary sponsor for MLW. I'm sure that synergy of being in the same town probably means that they are going to have a stronger partnership and will continue to work together moving forward. Big move, though, and good news for Charleston, South Carolina, which, interestingly enough, is where MLW had their recent YouTube show that they had just this past week, filmed it from Charleston, and they, I'm sure, timed the announcement to be with that event. 2 people have been taken into custody in connection with the death of former WWE NXT talent Ivan Warsaw, better known on the independent wrestling scene as Knuckles Madsen. Authorities have charged his ex-wife, Amanda Penny, as an accomplice to first-degree murder. Her current partner, Michael Hogue, is facing first-degree murder charges as well. Obviously, an ugly situation there on the indie scene. We send our condolences to his friends and family. And then our final news item is a good segue into our main event, because it concerns Survivor Series and something that I'm sure WWE did not count on, even though they are preparing for it, and that was rain in Southern California. It rarely rains in San Diego, which is, pretty well famous for being the ideal weather situation, perfect temperature year-round, very little in the way of rain. That is typical, but, as with many things weather-related, you're not seeing the typical here of late. Last week, we had a series of strong storms that brought heavy rain to the San Diego region, adding to what has already been one of the rainiest Novembers on record for Southern California. Now, next weekend's Survivor Series is taking place outdoors, Petco Park, where the Padres play. And we're still 6 days out at the time of this taping, so maybe normal San Diego weather is going to save the day. But right now, that long-term forecast has it looking as if it's going to get a little better around Thanksgiving. And then by Saturday, there's a chance of rain in the afternoon and even some overnight. So WWE is taking no chances. They obviously prepare for such things, even in places when it doesn't normally happen. So there are canopies over the rings. But if you are heading to San Diego or plan on attending the event, know that you might want to check that forecast and make sure you are prepared and dressed accordingly. With that, we'll close out the opening bell and move on to our main event, which is about Survivor Series. Survivor Series War Games. As I just mentioned, it is taking place on Saturday in San Diego at Petco Park, where the Padres play. So it'll be interesting to see the big setup in a baseball stadium. It's been a while since they played in a baseball stadium, so I am eager to see how it looks. Survivor Series has historically been what is considered one of the big four. So for longtime fans, you probably know what that is. But for anyone newer, I will explain that the big four pay-per-views were considered the tent poles of the pay-per-view calendar. When WWE first started pay-per-view, they used obviously WrestleMania as their big bet, but as they continued to expand for a while, there wasn't, as there are now, PLEs every month or every couple of weeks, it seems, when you include the NXT PLEs in there. But the original four mainstays, the ones that they had as bigger shows than the other pay-per-views, was always WrestleMania, King of the Ring, Survivor Series, as well as SummerSlam. Those were, Royal Rumble, not King of the Ring, but those were considered the biggies, and they put more time and effort into those. Now, SummerSlam, WrestleMania were just mega cards. Royal Rumble, obviously, was a gimmick pay-per-view based around a gimmick match, and Survivor Series was something that they did similarly. The Survivor Series concept was always team elimination matches. And because of that, you would have multiple of these elimination matches. And it was always this hodgepodge of teams to get them full so that you'd have, regardless of what storylines had been going on, some strange bedfellows and some forced rivalries and storylines that didn't necessarily, like, what did you get from winning? Like, Survivor Series was never a great concept to me. If you disagree and you miss the old elimination style Survivor Series, traditional Survivor Series matches is what they called them in later years when they would have them. They quickly learned that the fans did not want to sit through 3 hours of just those elimination matches. So they would have normal matches as if it was a normal pay-per-view, and then maybe one or two of what they, again, began to call traditional Survivor Series matches when they brought them back. They've attempted different concepts over the years to update Survivor Series. And where we've landed on these last couple of years is War Games. Again, calling on some history here, but old-time fans will remember that War Games was originally a NWA/WCW concept, actually from the brain of one Dusty Rhodes. And, of course, WWE owns all that intellectual property. They brought it over and began using it a couple of years ago in NXT as an annual event. And it proved very popular. It is a very unique gimmick match. It is double ring, double cage, and teams where the participants enter at certain intervals. So it's basically chaos, and it is exciting. And it's certainly way more exciting than elimination matches in the traditional Survivor Series style. If you disagree with me, please let me know. I'm sure there are some hardcore fans out there just longing for a return to traditional Survivor Series setup, but I like War Games a whole lot better, and it doesn't bother me at all that we have completely got rid of um, the traditional Survivor Series elimination style matches. The only downside may be the fact that it's no longer an NXT concept, but NXT's gone to something interesting for their final show of usually their final show of the pay-per-view calendar, and that's the Iron Survivor Challenge. But that's a whole other show. We're here to talk about Survivor Series War Games. We're going to get into the matches. I do think, though, that they have done a good thing by not only switching away from having all elimination matches, they're smart enough to know that even the War Games concept itself will burn folks out. So you do have a couple of matches on this show that are traditional in the sense of being one-on-ones. And let's talk about those first. Starting off, let's talk about the Women's World Championship, where champ Stephanie Vaquer is taking on Nikki Bella. Let me know what you think about the Nikki Bella return. It's kind of been snake bit from the beginning in my mind. Originally, she was supposed to come back and face Liv Morgan. Liv's untimely and unfortunate injury made, right from the start, Nikki sort of off on the wrong foot. Nikki ended up in a battle royal for her first match back and just never has found her footing. Nikki Bella and her sister are legit like Hall of Famers. They definitely bridged that gap from the time of bra and panties diva matches to the women's evolution that we're still reaping the benefits of today. Nikki particularly, upped her game and changed the perception that people had of her as just a pretty face. So I'm happy to see her back. Always happy to see someone who can still go in the ring, come back for the right reasons. It's just that thus far in her return, it's just been lackluster. And she has no reason really to be in this match other than think that at this point in time they're going to try the heel turn. Obviously, she turned on Stephanie, and that is the storyline of this match. But there is no way or no reason why WWE should pull a switch here. Stephanie Vaquer is probably the brightest star in their women's division, certainly the fastest rising star in this women's division, who only recently, in the grand scheme of things, has got that title. And I think a long run is probably what is planned for Stephanie. I would not be surprised to see her marching through all the competition all the way through WrestleMania season to the big event itself. She's certainly not going to lose it to a Nikki Bella at this stage of Nikki's career, having recently turned to the hillside and not really showing the momentum that I'm sure that she thought she would have at this point in her return. I wish her return was going better for her. It is not. And so hopefully this is kept decisive. I really don't even think that Stephanie should sell much. I think this should be as quick and as dominant a performance as you can get. I do think that even though Nikki does need something to help with her stalled momentum, I think it would be more damaging to Stephanie to take someone who has just returned, who's shown some rust, and have her even Steven in a contest. So let's make it quick. Let's make it decisive. Let's have the right person win here, and that would be Stephanie Vaquer. The next one is a little bit more difficult to call, and that is the Intercontinental Championship match with the newly crowned champ, John Cena, on his farewell tour in one of his very last appearances against Dominic Mysterio. This will be John Cena's last appearance on a PLE. Obviously, he will be wrestling his final match on Saturday night's main event. But as far as PLEs go, in a big crowd, in a big stadium, this is going to be it for the one and only John Cena. He is obviously a Hall of Famer, a legend, the greatest of all time that they try to Billy Matt, that is very debatable, but there is still no denying the drawing power of a John Cena as a 17-time world champion. It is amazing, though, that in the many decades that he has been on our television screens, that he had never held the Intercontinental Championship until he beat Dominic recently on television to become a Grand Slam champion. That November 10th title win was shocking. It is a little shocking also in some ways that they're running it back so that you have Dominic Mysterio versus John Cena again, with Dom this time the challenger trying to get back his championship. There's only so many punches left on John Cena's dance card, so it is quite the compliment to Dom that the company thinks enough of him that he is taking multiple slots on that dance card by facing John Cena again. When you think of all the people who are still young on the roster who could have benefited from the John Cena rub as he's taking his farewell laps, hey, they're doing it with Dom again. And that just goes to show that Dom is going to be a big part of WWE's future, and you can see that from the fan reactions. John Cena, however, will he lose his Intercontinental title this soon back to Dominic Mysterio? I think it's kind of interesting that John won the title in his hometown, or the home area, I guess, of Boston. And this match, the rematch, takes place in the general vicinity of where Dominic is from, right there in San Diego. So maybe that is the play for trying to have them go back and have these matches this close together. I don't think that John Cena is going to retire the Intercontinental Champion, but I do think that it would lose something for him to turn around and lose to Dominic at this point in time, so close to his final match. We're going to have a lot to say here in a couple of shows. We're going to do a whole John Cena show right prior to his final match. We'll talk a lot in that show about whether or not John should win or lose the final match of his career. If he doesn't have the Intercontinental title at that point in time, it could change things. I fully expect he will. So you're probably talking John Cena's last match and an Intercontinental title match as well for whomever wins the last time is now tournament. I think Dominic here puts up a good fight and then loses for the second time. And where Dom goes from here, I don't know, but I do think that John Cena needs to be kept strong into that final match, and just to give more appearance that he could possibly go off into the sunset as a champion, and then they have a tournament for the title, which is always a possibility that someone retires a champ and then relinquishes the belt. The interesting thing about this one isn't going to be the outcome, because, again, I just don't see Dom winning, but maybe it'll be who actually the crowd gets behind. You have John Cena in his farewell tour in one of his last big matches, the last one at a PLE, the last one at a stadium. Will that be counteracted by the fact that the fans absolutely love Dominic Mysterio? Especially, I imagine, what that crowd in San Diego, so close to home, is going to be like for Dom. You might see a mixed, you might see a return of the Let's Go Cena sucks chance, which would be very interesting and apropos. John would probably get a kick out of it. We're going to move on now to talk about the War Games matches themselves. So on the women's side, you have Rhea Ripley, Io Sky, Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, and AJ Lee taking on Nia Jax, Lash Legend, the Kabuki Warriors, and Becky Lynch. You have multiple rivalries coming to a head in this match. Some of them even amongst people who are on the same team. Obviously, you have Rhea and Io, who have historically been famous challengers to one another, who have, though for a while now, been on the same side, feuding against the Kabuki Warriors. You also have Bliss and Flair as a tag team, and who have been tormented recently by the newly formed tag team of Nia Jax and Lash Legend. Happy to see Lash getting the call up to NXT. I think that she's going to be a great big monster heel, and working with Nia Jax honestly is I think going to be good for her. And I say that as someone who's not necessarily a fan of Nia Jax, but I think that Lash has definitely earned her way up, and it does make sense to pair her with a veteran and honestly someone with the look and style of a Nia Jax. They do make what appears to be a formidable tag team. I have liked the way that they booked this with all the attacks that have been introducing Lash a little bit by a little bit to the audience who may not be familiar with her work. I do think it was odd the way they got around to Charlotte leaving the team only to come right back. I understand that they're teasing tension because she and Rhea, have a history, maybe can't get along. But the fact that she left the team, I really did think at the time that they were writing her out of this story for whatever reason and that we were moving on. And then the very next week, Alexa manages to, because of circumstances, talk her back in. So will this team be able to hold on the face side? I'm going to say no. I think that there is definitely going to be a break with Charlotte and Rhea, and Alexa is going to be stuck in the middle of that a little bit. But what will the outcome be? Will that cost them the match because of it? There's definitely going to be tension. That I think there even might be physicality. Will it be enough to let the heels come out on top? I believe so. And I believe that Lash is going to have a big match. I think that especially where you're introducing Lash at this point in time, you sort of have to have her. She has more to gain in this scenario than the faces do. Obviously, AJ Lee is a bit of a wild card in this one. And I say she's a wild card because she has not been around, long, and this is her second in-ring appearance. Will they let her be on the losing side? I think that in a War Games match, it doesn't matter quite as much because this really is a spectacle. There really isn't anything on the line. It is a way to sort of titillate the audience with violence and get some really cool spots. And it's a way really to spin off other stories. So what is the AJ Lee story going to be coming out of this? Because I don't believe that she is done. I don't believe that she is just making special appearances on behalf of her husband. I do think that there's probably something planned for her at WrestleMania. We may not get those seeds planted in this, but I do believe we're going to see some seeds planted for other things, especially what we're seeing with Flair and Alexa versus Lash and Nia, as well as Rhea and Charlotte perhaps having a bit of a breakdown themselves. So I do think that the heels are going to prevail in this one. I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case for the men's match, which let's move on to talk about that. You have CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, the Usos, and Roman Reigns versus the Vision, which is Bronson and Logan Paul. Okay, we'll get into that. Drew McIntyre and Brock Lesnar. So lots of moving parts on this one. Obviously, I believe that it's fair to assume that we had a punt when it came to Survivor Series, and all because of Seth Rollins' injury. The former leader of the Vision had to be written out, and I imagine because of that, plans for Survivor Series changed as well. I'm sure he was originally going to be leading a heel Vision instead of being turned on by a heel Vision. Does he make any appearance at this point? I still think it's probably too soon for him to even be teasing a comeback from injury. They never really said how long he'll be out. Obviously, that's going to play into the background. But because of Seth's absence, Paul Heyman and the Vision have aligned themselves with Logan Paul, of all people. And then when they went looking for members to fill out their tag team, they also ended up pulling back in Drew McIntyre, who was on a suspension, but apparently if you're allowed to pick your Survivor Series team the way that Paul Heyman was allowed to, it didn't matter if someone was suspended, he could call them back. Real life reason is that Drew is not on a suspension, obviously, but he is on a hiatus filming a movie, the movie Highlander. So there must be an opening in the filming schedule or the opportunity to come back and do a couple of TVs prior to War Games and then War Games itself. And then, of course, you also have that final spot on each team being most recently filled when Roman Reigns came back and joined his cousins right after Brock Lesnar came back and aligned himself with Paul Heyman's group. So let's break all this down. I know I said that I saw that the heel team was probably going to win the women's match. I just think that the faces here have probably the momentum, but I can definitely see it going the other direction as well. So what do you think? How do you come down on this one? On the one hand, we have the opportunity for whatever happens next for CM Punk. I do think that might be Brock Lesnar in his future. That's a match that they have not done since both of them really have returned. I do think that for Cody Rhodes, when you look at the champion here and where his next challenge is coming from, I think he is on a collision course with Braun Breaker. And I believe that Braun Breaker is going to be the future of WWE, and that's who they are putting their money on right now as the leader of the new vision. I know Seth is going to have a say at some point in time when he returns, and I think that he'll be confronting Braun. The question will be when that happens, and will Braun be a champion by that point in time? I know that I'm waffling here because originally I had thought that, and I had said that maybe it was going to be the opposite as to the women's match, heels versus face winning here. But the more I look at it, the more I've convinced myself that Braun Breaker is going to be standing tall at the end of this, regardless of who wins this match, the heels or the faces. I foresee that Braun Breaker is going to be one of the men standing tall at the end of this, looking very obvious as if he is the next challenger for Cody Rhodes, which I think is actually a right move. And how quickly we get to that match, that will be the question. So what do you think? How do you think that Survivor Series is going to break down? Do you agree with my predictions or disagree? And do you like the War Games concept? Let's be honest here. The one thing that WWE is going to have a hard bar to pass when it comes to this War Games is you can call it War Games because that's what it is, but AEW just did this. They can't call it War Games. They call it Blood and Guts. So while the name of the gimmick match is copyrighted, the gimmick itself under another name is fair game. So Tony Khan maybe is a little upset with all the counter programming that TKO has been putting his way. So he beat WWE to the punch here, providing a Blood and Guts on free television on Dynamite a couple of weeks ago that honestly set the bar pretty high. I know the star power is greater in WWE, the spectacle factor, the production factor, everything is elevated in WWE compared to AEW. But the work of those two matches, particularly the women's match, which was as violent a match I have ever seen the female performers allowed to participate in. There's no way in the world the level of blood and violence that you saw in the AEW television match is going to be matched by what the women are allowed to do on a PLE and WWE. So depending on how much you like those sorts of matches and the Blood and Guts might depend on whether or not you think that AEW's concept is actually superior to the WWE version of the same concept. But I guess time will tell, and we can talk about that next week because that is what we are talking about. When Doug returns, we are going to be back talking Survivor Series, giving a review for everything that happens. let's hit our big finish. This is when we do the 1, 2, 3 for the week, and that is our botch, our performance, and our match of the week. We're going to start with the botch. And since he's not here, I'm going to call Doug my botch. No, actually, I want to say it's Doug and I. It's truly a botch. When you look at last week's show, we previewed Full Gear. We were horrible. Typically, our previews, which you just watched, and hopefully we will be way more right this time. If so, I'll blame Doug's presence in throwing us off last time. But I think he got one more match correct than I did, but we both had an abysmal prediction record for AEW. So either kudos to Tony Khan for swerving everyone with some unconventional booking, and I will stipulate that things like the Samoa Joe title victory, being the world champ again, that's probably something not a whole lot of people predicted. So, yeah, in that instance, kudos to Tony for swerving us all. But, yeah, we just did bad. Did not do well at all with our predictions. We'll see if I did better this week talking Survivor Series. As far as performer of the week, I mentioned him earlier, the Never Seen 17, John Cena. This was his final time in New York City. He was on Raw. He was in Madison Square Garden. He won on his way out. He was good on the mic. The love that was in the air, just everything about his promo, the match, just the whole thing worked. Him carrying the Intercontinental title at this point, it also works. He's definitely not coasting into retirement. In fact, I think that he has gotten stronger the latter half of this farewell run than he did in the beginning of the farewell run. Again, we're going to have a whole show on that. You can see it going across the bottom of the screen, what our upcoming schedule is, and we can talk more about it at that time. But John Cena, it's hard to underestimate just how much he has meant to the wrestling industry and how he is going out the way he is going out, giving some career-defining performances here at the very end. So John Cena is my performer of the week. There is a time I certainly would never see myself saying that, but hey, it's true. And then finally, match of the week. There's so many good options this week and so many good options from last night's pay-per-view, and that is AEW's Full Gear. I am going to pick from Full Gear and say I'm running it back. So this is a match that actually was a rematch from a few weeks ago, a series of matches these gentlemen have had, and this one stands tall with those others as well. Kyle Fletcher, Mark Briscoe. It was a surprising win. This is another one of those that Doug and I got wrong when we thought for sure Kyle Fletcher, on the run he's been having and the fact that he is obviously being portrayed as a centerpiece for that promotion moving forward, did not seem like Mark Briscoe, it was going to be his time to win. And then, lo and behold, Mark Briscoe walks away with the championship and did so in a great match, honestly. Even though it was not an expected outcome, it was not an unwelcome outcome, as Mark Briscoe is a feel-good story, a feel-good character, someone that anyone who loves the sport of professional wrestling cannot help but feel for Mark Briscoe and all he's been through these last few years. And now for him to, believe it or not, this is his first championship goal in AEW. So well-deserved, well-earned, and a heck of a match by these two. I don't know how long this reign will go. I have a feeling Kyle Fletcher is going to get some pretty quick revenge, or maybe Kyle Fletcher is being positioned to move on to even bigger and better things for a different championship. Whatever the case, go watch this one. Maybe the only thing I could have done without was, the licking of the blood by Fletcher. It's something that AEW seems to be full of vampires. But Doug and I had a show around Halloween. If you watch that one, you will know that we debated the efficacy of using so much blood. And pretty much AEW does it way too much. They definitely did at Full Gear. There were a lot of matches that became a little desensitizing because of the level of violence and blood. One of the gorier pay-per-views they've had in a while, even though it wasn't a blood and guts style advertised as such pay-per-view. That notwithstanding, this match still exceeded any expectation you could have had on it. and that is just a minor quibble. So go watch that match. Go watch the whole Full Gear pay-per-view if you have some time, because it was pretty strong start to finish, despite how gruesome it was. With that, fans, we are to the end of another episode of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We are at the very end of our season. Next week, we are going to present our penultimate episode of 2025, and that is reviewing Survivor Series. And then after that, for our last show of the year, we are presenting a Christmas special where two guys who never have much appreciated John Cena are going to give an entire show over to appreciating John Cena. No Grinches here, all Cena. That's 2 weeks from now. Whenever you watch, whether it's live or on demand, whether it's Facebook or our YouTube channels, we appreciate you. Comment, share, like, make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for your support. We will see you again next week when Doug returns. Until that time, if he were here, he'd say, go watch some wrestling, everybody. Good night.